Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. We're here today with special guest, Dr. Peter Favaro, who's here to share with us his new book, Bad People Bible: How to Identify, Deal with, and Remove Toxic Individuals from Your Life. So what if you could spot toxic behavior before it takes root in your life? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Dr. Peter Favaro is one of the world's most respected psychologists and a master of human behavior. So welcome to the show, Dr. Peter Favaro.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, what a great honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. So what inspired you to write this?
I've lectured at a number of symposia, and a lot of what I lecture about is people who exploit other people. I did an interview and a lecture at the United Nations right before COVID about women being exploited in cyberspace, and I always run across somebody in these lectures that says, well, how do you explain it? Aren't all people good? All people are born good, and they can all become better. And I don't believe that. I believe that some people are bad and won't change and enjoy being bad. Uh, and my primary occupation is as a forensic expert. And I encounter lots of people in doing my forensic work that are simply not good. And they exploit people and they abuse women. And I finally got the notion to sit down and write my 21st book, The Bad People Bible, and really do it from a perspective of how do you help people identify toxic individuals, and how do you steer clear of them and get them out of your life? So every time I write another book, I'm sitting down at the breakfast table with my wife, eating a bowl of cereal, and I say, we're just talking. And I say something, and then I say, well, that would make a good book. So one of the last times I did that, Bad People Bible sprung up.
My goodness. Well, I'm so glad that it has because you're really helping people with so many. I think everyone knows somebody that they would consider to be like a toxic person. But before we go too far down that road, I'd love for you to define what toxic people are because that way we can have a reference point.
I start off by saying that everybody does bad things. And I include myself in that as well. I've done bad things in my life. Not reprehensible, but bad. I've been selfish. I've gossiped, and I've done things that I wouldn't consider to be so nice. Bad people want to be bad. They are bad because it gives them a sense of enjoyment to get a power advantage over another individual. And you can get pretty far in life by being a bad person. So they're often rewarded for their bad behavior. And the type of person I'm talking about gets a lot of gratification from hurting others. So that's our starting point.
So, why do you think so many of us struggle to identify toxic people early or bad people early?
Because we live in a very Pollyannish society in some ways, and people just don't want to believe that another human being is derives pleasure from hurting them. And that's what leads a lot of women into abusive relationships. They believe that this person who's showing bad traits and bad tendencies can be fixed just by loving them the right way. And that's not the way it works.
Well, I often hear of people talk about how they get into relationships and this person's amazing and wonderful and so great. And they get married or they move in together and things go south really fast. Why is that?
Because Bad people, truly bad people, are great starters in relationships. They're great manipulators. They're very good at seducing other, other people. And there's an expression called love bombing. A bad person will love bomb you. And, the example I use all the time is a man and a woman are out on their first date, and the man knows how to handle the waiters and knows about the wine and will complain if their date's dish isn't uh, perfect and stand up for them. And then 6 months later, that's the worst control freak they ever met. So uh, they're very good at disguising, bad people are very good at disguising their true nature.
Well, in your book, you talk about how boundaries are not walls but filters. Can you explain that for us so we can really understand?
Yeah, you know, we talk a lot about how important it is to set boundaries, you know. And when I say a boundary is not a wall, I mean that it's sometimes a very, very healthy thing to be able to set a boundary with another person, especially if they are a romantic partner. And I say that it's much more important to listen carefully to a person so that if you have to set a boundary, you are doing it in an appropriately self-protective way. So when you listen to someone, you don't necessarily have to put up a wall, but you have to learn to hear what they're saying behind the words. That's what I mean by a filter.
So, what are some tips then we can use to start identifying people who are masquerading as good people versus folks who are showing up just authentic?
The example I use all the time is we all know people who, in between the time that we see them, they have fought 50 wars with other people in other places. Uh, the guy that pumps the gas did something to insult them. A waiter did something to insult them. A person on the street did something to insult them. And all of those stories is evident. They're evident that this is a person who likes being in conflict with one another. I know a guy who's the landlord of a friend of mine, and he seems like a nice guy, but every time someone comes to the house to fix something, it's another battle. It's another war. No one is ever competent. No one is ever good. And he fires people and gets new people and fire. He likes having a fight. He likes being in a fight with someone. And there are people like that.
So, are there ways that we can identify folks that have these kind of traits? Is it just knowing them for long periods of time?
Listen to the stories they tell. Listen to how many villains cruise in and out of their lives. That's a big tip off. And like bad people, they divide the world into two types of people. Okay, the first type of people are inept, incompetent, horrible people, right? And then the next group is everybody who's like me, and you have to be very. I think you listen for how critical they are of other people, because that criticism is going to come around and be pointed at you one day.
So, is this bad person different than, let's say, like a psychopath or a sociopath?
Well, I think there are different flavors of bad people. There are words that are very, very in vogue right now. Narcissist, sociopath, psychopath. These are terms that we throw around rather loosely, and sometimes rather prematurely. But another word is a compound word that I've been hearing often: a narcopath, a person who's both narcissistic and a psychopath, person who has no problem telling you how wonderful they are and how many decisions uh, they've uh, they've made that benefit other people, even though really the only person that those decisions benefit are themselves. And you can get very, very far in life by being that way, by demanding that other people worship you.
I think many people would probably go, okay, well, I've had a boss like that, or a neighbor like that, or maybe even a family member like that. So, how do we deal with those folks, especially if we have to see them?
Well, I think now this is going to sound like hard advice to take. The most effective way of dealing with people like that is to minimize the interactions that you have with them. You know, if you don't interact with someone, they can't put you in their sights. And then there's a term called gray rocking. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
No, I
But
haven't.
what it means is that when there's a toxic person in your life, you treat them the same way that you would treat a gray rock if you saw one on the street. So if you saw a gray rock on the street, how would you treat that?
I would care less.
Exactly. You would walk right by it. And that's, you know, narcissists and toxic people, they thrive on attention. And if they can't get attention by, doing something that makes you worship them, they'll put you in their sights and have a relationship with you which thrives on conflict. So it takes two people to have a conflict. And if you don't push back, you're not going to stay in their sights because they're going to be easier targets for them to pick on. And then, people will listen to me say that and say, "Well, do you think that means, I have to be a coward?" No, you don't have to be a coward. You just have to choose your battles. There's there's a saying, would you rather be right or dead? And I think that, we just had that horrible incident of, that person getting shot for uh, being disrespectful to the flag or putting his finger up to the flag. And I read people's comments about that and they say, well, it's a free country. You know, you should be able to do whatever you want. Yeah, you should be able to do whatever you want, but you should know what the consequences of your behavior are as well. And sometimes those consequences are attracting people that are really bad and really mean and carry guns.
I like how in your book you talk about building psychological armor. Can you share with our listeners what that is?
Yes, I'm a big believer in practice. And the thing that people should practice the most, but tend not to practice, is they don't practice thinking and they don't understand how important it is to think about their thinking, to listen to that internal voice, right? And think about what you're thinking about. It's sort of a hard concept to grasp, but once you do, it's very it's very helpful. So you have a terrible boss, and your boss is a bad person, and he does things like take credit for your good work, or the way that he deals with you doesn't always have to be a he, but the way that they deal with you is by criticizing you and insulting you. So I always tell people it's a good idea to practice how you're going to react to that before it happens. What am I going to do? Am I going to look past that person, ignore most of what they have to say, control the emotions on my face? I think all of those things are worthwhile practicing because when you're in the moment, your emotions are going crazy, right? And they're coming out of everywhere and they're making you say things to yourself. They're insulting you and you're fuming. Say, he's insulting me. He has no right to insult me. And this is unfair and it's not right. All of those things are probably true. But are they going to get you anywhere? Or are they going to just escalate what's going on? You punch your boss in the nose 5 minutes before you're ready to walk out of there and never go back. But on a day to day, if you need that job, it's much better to just roll. Roll with it. Understand that there are people in this world who, if their mother couldn't teach them how to behave, you're not going to teach them how to behave. So that's what I mean by psychological armor, understanding the reality that there are bad people around, and that sometimes the best way of dealing with them is to wait until they evaporate. Let them talk themselves out. Let them yell themselves out. Let them insult themselves out. And, you get to go home after that.
That's the end of it. I've got to work on my poker face because a lot of times I look at them like, "What in the heck are you talking about?"
Right. It's always about it's always about rhetorical questions, right? Which that's a good example of rhetorical question. You know, we have a million of them, especially where I grew up in Brooklyn. What are you, an idiot? things like things like that. Do you know who I am? So I always say it's a good idea not to use too many rhetorical questions because they tend to escalate conflict.
So, do you see like a trend where good people are falling for the bad ones?
Well, I think if I had to if I had to put it in a gender framework, women are so much healthier emotionally than most men. And I don't think that women fall for bad people. I think they make science projects out of bad people. And they see the one or two things that might be worth loving, and then they assume that all the rest of the things, even if they're bad, can be fixed by loving them the best way they can. And it's just not true. I think that if it's a truly bad person, they will use that love against you. So if you're being controlled, if you're being manipulated, if you're being insulted, if you're being unappreciated, and you're a woman in a relationship, go.
Is it because people think, "Oh, I've got a remodel project happening here with this person. I can make it happen." When
Yes, yes. And at the risk of sounding gender biased against males, women are the people that make things happen emotionally. Not that men can't. It's just that they're not programmed to. They have to learn.
when people are leaving a relationship, let's say it's a harmful relationship, I've heard that they sometimes feel a ton of guilt in doing that. Is that true? And if so, is there a way to overcome that?
It's true because women see the end of a relationship often as a failure on their part. I didn't do enough. I wasn't good enough. And relationships don't end because one person or the other fails. They end because people are not, at the end of the day, those people aren't compatible. Or at the end of the day, they don't set proper boundaries. Or at the end of the day, they look past what they shouldn't look past.
All those red flags that get ignored.
And it's easy because nobody wants to have to deal with the work of ending a relationship. It's a really hard thing to do because you have to throw aside a lot of very, very good memories, a lot of happy memories. Because all relationships, I mean, if you don't have at least a few happy memories, you're in a really, really bad relationship. But the beginning of relationships, the honeymoon period, people usually develop happy memories, good memories, and people don't want to let those go, and they don't want to feel like they've been fooled. How many people at the end of a relationship say, that person made a real idiot out of me? I hear that all the time, you know, uh, and it's because, so I'll get a little deeper. In relationships and in life in general, there are two emotions that people can concentrate on. Hope, right? Everybody hopes everything will get better. But I tell people, if you're hoping for something, you're wasting your time. You know, faith is what you need, because faith is something that is more of a two-way thing. If I give you my faith, okay, I have faith in you. I have confidence in you. then I can measure what I get in return. If
Oh,
I hope that we're going to be a good couple, well, that's a one-way street. But faith is more of a two-way street. I have faith in you. I have trust in you. Then you know how to measure what you get back.
that's so wise. And it sounds so simple, but it seems like a lot of people don't do that. I mean, I've never approached it with faith, but I love hearing that.
Yeah, everybody, because again, we live in sort of a Pollyannish society. Yeah, everybody hopes that they have the best possible relationship they can have, but it's much more important to have faith. Faith gives you a metric. And I'm really not talking about spiritual faith, although many people would see it as a spiritual thing. I'm talking about confidence as faith.
Okay. I like that. Well, and then to kind of dovetail with this, so how then do we trust that we're like, let's say we're starting a new relationship. How do we trust that what we're seeing is true, or do we verify it? Because I know I've got friends that will look people up 7 ways to Sunday to find out all the information on them, but we don't want to become too much. We don't want to be paranoid.
I think a little paranoia is good. And with respect to the whole issue of trust, I wrote the Bad People Bible off the heels of another book that I just wrote about staying in love, right? Secrets to Making Love Last. That's the last book I wrote before Bad People Bible. And I say, well, why do you think they call it falling in love, right? Because it's really not something that you can control. It's like stepping off a cliff and hoping you're not dropping, 1,500 feet. But that's why they call it falling in love, because you do it blindly. That's why they say love is blind. And again, you need a metric. In the beginning of a relationship, I'm going to give you some measure of trust. What do you do with it? That's what you can measure. That's what you can measure back. Today, um, we have the biggest disruptor of trust that there could possibly be, the cell phone. I think that cell phones are responsible for destroying more relationships than anything else. But they're a very good metric for trust.
Isn't that the truth?
My primary occupation is that I help judges determine who should get custody of children during a divorce. So I hear everyone's relationship story as I'm going through the evaluation process. And I can't tell you how many of those stories have something to do with a cell phone.
That must be a hard job to do.
Yeah, my job is pretty hard. And it's only the second hardest thing I do as a forensic expert. I also do international child abduction cases, um, which is even more sad and more difficult in terms of evaluating.
I couldn't even imagine how challenging all of those would be.
But
What?
it's super rewarding.
Oh my gosh, I bet it is. So, what are some of the earliest red flags someone should look for if they're dealing with someone who's probably like who's a controlling person? We'll just put it that way.
So I already talked about the person who gets into fights with everybody. And you'll see in the early parts of a relationship, that person will say, you know, you don't love me as much as I love you. You're not as loyal as I. You'll never find someone, who treats you like I do. And they'll evaluate your response. And after a while, the manufactured mistrust gets worse and worse. And when I lecture about things, People say to me, I feel like you get it. I feel like you're reading my mind, because it's a very common dynamic in relationships. There's it all revolves around a power shift in the relationship. A bad person, very, very happy to give you equal power in the beginning of a relationship. But soon after the balance of power is disrupted, they want all the power. If you're in a relationship and the person starts criticizing you about the way you dress or how you look, that's also a red flag, mostly for women, because you get guys who don't show their jealousy until, the reason why they fall in love with you is because you look so beautiful. And then the reason why they criticize you is because you look so beautiful. Again, it's all in the context of power shifts in relationships. And the main currency, whether you're a man or a woman, is criticism. Beginning of a relationship, partner can't do any wrong. But when there's a toxic person in that relationship, all of a sudden the criticism comes, because criticism is a way of keeping someone down when you promote yourself.
Mm-mm-mm. Well, then let's say, and we're not going to, we can't even if we tried to cover any portion of the book because it's so in depth and I felt it to be such a great read. But let's say we get to a point where we've left that toxic relationship. How do we rebuild ourselves again? Because a lot of times I think people are just feeling pretty low then.
They do. The main thing after a break with a toxic person is to learn how to be friends with yourself again. Because toxic relationships take away your identity. They take away your sense of self. And learning to do things alone is so important. I always tell people who just had a breakup, go out to eat. You know, learn how to sit at a table while you're reading a book on your phone, and uh, learn how to have a comfortable time with yourself. That's the first big hurdle that people have to achieve and overcome. Don't be so focused on connecting with someone else. Some people do not feel whole unless they're connected to someone else. But you have to feel whole first.
It's really doing that personal work so we can stand on our own and be our own person.
That's 100% true. And therapy is good for that. I think that when people find the right therapist and make the right connection, that can be a very, very good source of support for you when you're going into, like I always say, when you're becoming Marianne V 2.0 or whatever it is you're up to. I think people really need to reinvent themselves, whether it's in the context of a relationship or in the context of work or anything else. I think we have we have a long enough life to do more than one thing.
Well, thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
And I love how your book really shines light not only on this topic, but helps people then overcome. You look for the key points. It's really helping people to walk a better path.
I you know, I've been writing for a very long time, and the biggest compliment anybody could give me is that when I read your book, I feel like I'm talking to you, like people who know me, you know, will say, reading your book is just like having a conversation with you. Just homespun practical wisdom, no psychological mumbo jumbo or self help mumbo jumbo. Just a nice practical conversation with some good homespun wisdom.
What do you hope and would like readers and our listeners to take away from your book?
What I'd like them to take away is that it's it's an anthem of mine, right? Which is You don't have to be sick to get better. You don't have to pathologize what's happened in your life to make yourself feel better. And I think that that's one of the problems that we have with mental health in our country, is that it operates on a disease model. So if you feel bad, then what happens is you feel bad about feeling bad. And you're under a much bigger rock than you were even before you started feeling bad. So I tell people all the time, don't be ashamed of feeling bad. It doesn't make you sick. It gives you a challenge to get better.
Well, your book is definitely the book people should be reading to improve their lives and to really identify the key players in it. Where can our listeners go to connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, if you go to my Teachables site, right, which is cihr.teachable.com, you will see the Bad People Bible community, where people can go to listen to me, to interact with me, to have Zoom sessions with me. The book is brand new, so that site, that community is just going up. But you can, you can interact directly with me through that community, and also do other people the favor of giving them support.
Well, I've already purchased your book for two people that I know, so they'll be getting that pretty soon. Well, Dr. Favaro, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It was absolutely a pleasure. Anything I could do for you in the future, please don't hesitate to knock on my door.
Well, thank you, Dr. Favaro. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Bad People Bible: How to Identify, Deal with, and Remove Toxic Individuals from Your Life. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmaryann.com for more information.